An Apache woman was left naked in the Old West market. A cowboy did what no one else dared to do. The sun beat down on the dusty streets of the small western town, casting long shadows across wooden storefronts and the uneven cobblestones. The market was alive with the usual sounds. Merchants shouting their wares, horses neighing in nearby stables, and the clatter of wagon wheels rolling over the rough ground. Children ran between stalls, laughing and chasing each other, while townsfolk haggled over prices for food, clothing, and tools. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the earthy scent of livestock, creating a familiar, comforting atmosphere. But today, the town would witness a moment that would unsettle even the hardiest of its citizens. At the center of this lively scene, a woman appeared. She moved with careful steps, her head lowered, trying to remain unnoticed. Her hair, long and black, was tangled from the journey that had brought her to the town. She was of Apache heritage, her eyes dark and deep, holding a strength that had carried her through hardships she could barely speak of. Yet, today, her spirit would be tested in a way that no one could prepare for. Before she could reach the edge of the market, a group of rough men surrounded her. Their faces were hard, and their eyes lacked compassion. Without warning, they grabbed her arms, pulling her roughly into the center of the bustling market. The townspeople paused, some stepping back in shock, others leaning forward with curiosity. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as fear took hold, yet she refused to scream. She knew that any outcry might provoke even more cruelty. One of the men, tall and cruel-looking, pushed her forward. She stumbled but managed to keep her balance. The crowd had grown quiet now, sensing the tension in the air. The market, once a place of trade and chatter, had become a stage for humiliation. They forced her to the ground, and in a shocking act of cruelty, left her exposed, stripping her of the few garments she had been wearing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mothers shielded their children's eyes, while others whispered among themselves. The woman curled slightly into herself, shivering, not from the cold, but from the humiliation and fear.
Her mind raced. How had it come to this?
She had traveled alone, careful to avoid trouble, yet the world seemed determined to punish her for reasons she could not understand. She could hear the men laughing, but it sounded distant, as if she were underwater. All that mattered in that moment was the burning shame and the impossible question: would anyone step forward to help? The townspeople, however, remained frozen. Some watched, wide-eyed, unsure if they should act. Others looked away, pretending not to see. A few whispered quietly, expressing disapproval or pity, but no one moved closer. The silence of the town was almost as cruel as the act itself. For the woman, the market transformed from a place of everyday life to a prison of judgment and ridicule. She felt trapped not only by the men who had brought her here, but also by the eyes of those who refused to intervene. Her thoughts drifted to her family, to the Apache land she had left behind. She remembered the stories her elders had told her about strength and resilience, about standing tall even when the world tried to break you. She clung to those memories now, drawing courage from them, even as tears welled in her eyes. She could not understand the cruelty around her, but she refused to surrender entirely to despair. As the minutes stretched on, a few children began to peek from behind stalls, their innocence allowing them to question the injustice they saw. Their small voices whispered among themselves, unsure, hesitant. Some of the older townsfolk shook their heads, muttering about troublemakers or outsiders, reinforcing the sense that she was alone in her suffering. The woman, though trembling, lifted her chin slightly. She would not allow her spirit to be completely crushed. Not yet. Then, from the edge of the market, a figure appeared. A man on horseback, wearing a worn leather hat and a faded coat, dismounted with ease and walked steadily toward the woman. His eyes were calm but focused, and his movements suggested a quiet confidence. Unlike the others, he did not look away or whisper about the scene. He walked directly into the crowd that had formed around the incident, unafraid of the stares or the whispers. The woman noticed him and felt a flicker of hope. She could not yet speak, but something in the way he carried himself suggested he might not be like the others. He moved with intention, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd instinctively parted as he passed, sensing a quiet authority in his presence. The men who had humiliated her stopped their laughter briefly, recognizing the confidence in the stranger's approach. He stopped a few feet away, raising his hands not in threat, but in reassurance. "Step aside," he said, his voice steady and calm. "This ends now." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The market seemed to hold its breath. The woman could not believe what she was hearing. Someone was willing to stand against the cruelty she had endured, someone willing to risk himself to protect her dignity. For the first time since she had been forced into the market, a sense of relief began to wash over her. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, though the fear had not entirely disappeared. The man's gaze was unwavering, filled with determination and quiet strength. He reached into his coat and produced a folded blanket, holding it out toward her. "Cover yourself," he said gently. "You are safe now." The woman hesitated only for a moment before accepting the blanket. It was small, but it was enough to shield her from the cruel eyes around her. The warmth of the fabric against her skin was comforting, and she felt a strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had never imagined that anyone in this place would dare to intervene. Yet here he was, standing for her when everyone else had looked away. The crowd reacted in mixed ways. Some townsfolk began to murmur quietly, inspired by the man's courage. Others scowled, muttering about how outsiders or troublemakers never brought anything but problems. The men who had humiliated her looked uncertain, unsure of how to respond to a challenge they had not anticipated. The atmosphere in the market had shifted. What had been a scene of cruelty was now a moment pregnant with tension and possibility. The woman clutched the blanket tightly around her shoulders, feeling a cautious sense of security. She dared to glance at the man, and he gave her a small, reassuring nod. His eyes conveyed understanding without judgment, a rare gift in a world that had treated her so harshly. In that moment, she realized that courage could take many forms, not just in physical strength, but in the willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. The men who had brought her to the market began to back away slowly, sensing the authority and moral clarity of the cowboy. Their laughter had died down, replaced by hesitation and unease. The crowd, too, seemed to relax slightly, though the whispers continued. Some began to speak to each other about what they had witnessed, questioning their own inaction and the norms that had allowed such cruelty to go unchallenged. The woman, still holding the blanket around her, felt a strange sense of pride mingled with her fear. She had survived the initial moment of humiliation, and now there was hope that the ordeal would not define her. For the first time that day, she could imagine stepping forward with dignity, supported by someone willing to act when others would not. The cowboy stayed close, keeping an eye on the crowd and the men who had sought to humiliate her. His presence was steadying, a reminder that even in a harsh and unforgiving world, there were those who could choose courage over cruelty. The woman felt a quiet gratitude well up inside her. She did not yet know what would happen next, but she understood that she was no longer entirely alone. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the market slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the memory of the incident lingered in the minds of the townsfolk. The woman remained at the center of the space, protected by the cowboy, her dignity restored for the moment. She realized that even in the darkest circumstances, moments of bravery and humanity could shine through, offering hope where none seemed possible. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel a measure of safety, and to believe that justice and compassion could exist even in a world that had seemed so cruel. And as the cowboy's calm, steady presence remained by her side, she understood that her story was not over. It had only just begun. The cowboy stood a few feet away from the woman, his eyes scanning the crowd. The market was no longer filled with the laughter and chatter. Instead, an uneasy silence had taken hold. Some townsfolk whispered among themselves, while others simply stared, unsure of how to react. Even the merchants paused, their hands frozen in midair as they held fruit, bread, or bolts of cloth. The men who had humiliated the Apache woman shifted nervously, glancing at each other, and then at the cowboy. The tallest among them stepped forward, his voice loud and threatening. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded. "This is none of your business." The cowboy did not flinch. He met the man's gaze steadily, his voice calm but firm. It is everyone's business when someone is treated unfairly, he said. You cannot humiliate her in the middle of this market and expect no one to care. The tall man sneered, but his confidence faltered slightly under the cowboy's calm authority.
And what are you going to do about it?
He spat. The woman clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the tension in the air. Her heart pounded as she realized that the man was looking for trouble, but she also noticed something about the cowboy. He didn't seem afraid. He took a slow step forward. I am going to make sure she is safe, he said. And I am going to make sure that justice is served, even if no one else has the courage to act. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that seemed to settle over the crowd. Even those who had laughed moments ago felt a stir of respect. A few merchants nodded quietly, and some of the children stepped closer, curious but cautious. They had never seen anyone speak so boldly, and the quiet confidence of the cowboy was unlike anything they had known. The tall man glared, then turned to the other two who had been with him. They muttered to each other but did not move forward. The power of the cowboy's presence had shifted the balance, if only slightly. The woman looked at the cowboy, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude. For the first time that day she felt a sense of hope. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling.
I did not think anyone would help me.
The cowboy nodded, offering a reassuring smile. You're not alone, he said gently. Not anymore. He gestured toward the blanket. Wrap it around you fully. Stand tall. Do not let them see you afraid. She did as he suggested, lifting her chin slightly and trying to square her shoulders. It was a small act, but it felt powerful. She could see the surprise on the faces of the men who had tried to humiliate her. They had not expected her to regain any sense of dignity. The tallest man finally spoke again, his voice sharper this time. You think a few words in a blanket will make her safe? You are alone, cowboy. No one else will help you. The cowboy met his gaze evenly. I do not need anyone else to do what is right. I only need to stand here and refuse to let cruelty continue. He stepped a little closer, his boots stirring the dust at the edge of the market. And I suggest you step away before this gets worse for you. The man laughed, a short, nervous sound. Worse for us? He asked. You are alone. You are just one man. His friends snickered behind him, but the sound was uneasy, as if they were unsure of what might happen next. The cowboy's calm, unwavering stance made the men hesitate. The crowd, sensing the tension, began to shift subtly. People whispered quietly, some expressing admiration, others concern. A few of the bolder townsfolk took small steps forward, as if testing the waters, inspired by the man's courage. The cowboy lowered his voice, but it carried across the quiet market. Courage is not in standing with the crowd when they are wrong, he said. It is in standing alone, if necessary, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and cruelty will not be tolerated here, not while I am present. The tallest man took a step back, momentarily thrown off by the weight of the words. The woman's heart leapt in her chest. She could feel her courage returning, bolstered by the man who had dared to act when everyone else had been silent. She straightened further, holding the blanket tightly, feeling a small but growing sense of strength. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some townsfolk nodded quietly, inspired by what they were witnessing. One merchant even spoke aloud, his voice clear despite the tension. Let her be! This is wrong! Others echoed him, slowly joining in. The tall man's confidence faltered further as he realized that the crowd was no longer entirely on his side. The cowboy glanced at the woman. You are safe for now, he said, but we need to get you out of the market before this escalates further. She nodded, a mix of fear and relief washing over her. Where will we go? She asked softly. He looked around, his eyes scanning the market quickly. Somewhere safe, he replied. Somewhere no one can find you easily. You have been through enough for one day. He offered his hand to her. Come with me. Trust me. The woman hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. It was firm and steady, giving her confidence she had not felt since being forced into the market. She allowed herself to be guided through the crowd, which parted silently as the cowboy led her forward. The men who had humiliated her watched, unsure of what to do next. Their bravado had been broken, and the respect the cowboy commanded was evident in the quiet murmurs of the townsfolk. Some whispered to each other about the courage of the man, while others shook their heads, still disbelieving. The woman's heart began to calm, though the memory of the humiliation still lingered sharply. As they moved toward the edge of the market, the cowboy kept a protective hand near her, ready to intervene if necessary. He walked with a quiet confidence, his presence alone a shield against further cruelty. The woman noticed how he remained calm despite the danger, and she drew strength from it, realizing that courage was contagious. Finally, they reached a quiet street just beyond the market. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the soft creaking of wooden signs and the distant sound of horses. The woman paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a sense of relief, though it was tempered by exhaustion and lingering fear. The cowboy stopped as well, turning to face her. "You are safe here," he said. "No one can harm you where we are going next, but I want you to understand something. What happened today is not your fault. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Tears welled in her eyes and she nodded. I don't know what to say," she whispered.
Thank you for everything.
He smiled gently. "You do not need to say anything. Just remember this. Courage and kindness matter, even when the world seems cruel. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to act to make a difference." The woman clutched the blanket closer, feeling the warmth and protection it offered. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to hope. The humiliation, though it had left a mark, was no longer absolute. Someone had stood for her. Someone had refused to let cruelty go unchallenged. The cowboy guided her further down the quiet street, moving with purpose. He led her to a small, safe place he knew in the town, a room above a stable where she could rest and gather her strength. Along the way, the woman noticed subtle signs of kindness from the townsfolk who had watched silently. Some nodded or whispered encouragement, inspired by the act they had witnessed. Even in a place that could be harsh and unforgiving, small sparks of goodness were beginning to emerge. Once inside the safe room, the woman finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She sat on the small cot, still clutching the blanket, and looked up at the cowboy. "I never thought anyone would help me," she said softly. "I thought I was alone." "You were never truly alone," he replied. "Courage exists in the hearts of those who choose to act, and sometimes it finds you when you least expect it." The woman smiled faintly, a small but meaningful gesture. Though she was still shaken, she felt a sense of empowerment growing inside her. The cowboy had shown her that dignity could be reclaimed, and that standing up for what was right could inspire others to do the same. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light through the small window, the woman realized that today had changed her forever. The fear and humiliation she had endured would always be a part of her, but so would the courage, kindness, and moral strength of the man who had stood for her. For the first time, she believed that even in a world that could be cruel and unjust, there was hope, and there were people willing to make it a better place. And somewhere in the quiet of that room, with a soft glow of evening light around them, she knew that her journey was only beginning. The market had been a place of cruelty, but it had also been the stage for bravery. And now she would carry that lesson forward, strengthened by the knowledge that even one person's courage could change the course of a day, and perhaps even a life. Hidden in, at the edge of town. The place was modest, with wooden shutters and a low, creaking roof, but it offered privacy and safety. He opened the door and stepped inside, motioning for her to follow. The woman hesitated, glancing back at the bustling market in the distance, a mix of fear and uncertainty lingering in her eyes. "This is a safe place," the cowboy said gently, noticing her hesitation. "You can rest here, gather your strength, and no one will find you." He closed the door behind them, and the sounds of the town faded, leaving only the soft creak of floorboards and the quiet murmur of a small fire burning in the hearth. She sank onto a simple wooden chair, holding the blanket tightly around her shoulders. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you help me?" No one else did. The cowboy crouched slightly to meet her gaze, his expression calm and steady. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said. "Sometimes standing up for what is right means risking yourself, even when no one else will. Today, I chose to act." She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. "They humiliated me in front of everyone. I feel broken."
You are not broken.
He said firmly. "What they did was cruel, but it does not define you. Your courage is here," he said, tapping gently on her chest. "It was never gone, only tested. And you passed even when it felt impossible." The woman swallowed, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not felt in hours. She had been terrified, humiliated, and alone, but now a small spark of hope burned within her. For the first time she felt that dignity and courage could survive even the cruelest moments. As they spoke, a faint noise drifted through the wooden walls, a soft scuffing of boots outside. The cowboy's eyes narrowed slightly. "I think we may have company," he murmured. He stood and moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. Outside, the tallest of the men who had humiliated her at the market stood with a small group looking around the alley. Their expressions were a mix of anger and frustration. They were searching for the woman, unaware that she had found safety. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He knew that they would not give up easily, and that confrontation was likely unavoidable. He turned back to the woman. "You need to stay here and stay quiet. Do not come near the door, and do not make a sound." "I will handle this." Her eyes widened.
You can't face them alone, she said. I have no choice, he replied calmly.
And sometimes courage means facing fear for someone else's sake, not your own. You've already shown bravery today by surviving. Now, I need to show mine. The woman nodded, her fear tempered by trust. She sat quietly, gripping the blanket, as the cowboy stepped toward the door. His boots were soft against the wooden floor, but his presence carried authority. He opened the door just enough to peer out, assessing the situation. The men outside had noticed a shadow move inside the alley.
She's here somewhere, the tallest shouted. We'll find her and make sure she remembers today.
His words were cruel, but the cowboy did not flinch. He stepped fully into the alley, keeping his body between the men and the woman's hiding place. She is not here for you to harm, he said firmly, his voice carrying over the narrow space. Leave now, or you will face consequences. The men laughed, but it was nervous, forced laughter. And what are you going to do about it? The tallest demanded, stepping closer. You are alone. No one else will back you up. The cowboy remained calm.
I do not stand alone, he said. I stand with what is right.
And that is stronger than fear, stronger than cruelty. I suggest you leave before you regret it. The men hesitated, glancing at one another. They had expected an easy target, a frightened woman, and perhaps one man who might do nothing. Instead, they found someone calm, confident, and unwavering. The whispers of the townsfolk from earlier in the market seemed to echo in their minds, reminding them that courage could inspire others. A tense silence fell over the alley. The woman peeked from the window, her heart pounding, seeing the confrontation unfold. She could see the fear in the men's eyes growing, a reflection of the calm bravery before them. They realized that the cowboy was not just standing for her, but for decency itself, something they had never considered before. Finally, the tallest man growled and stepped back, motioning for his friends to follow. This isn't over, he spat, but there was a hesitation in his voice. He had been confronted with courage he could not ignore, and his usual confidence wavered. The cowboy watched them retreat slowly, his eyes never leaving their backs. Only when he was certain they had gone far enough did he turn back to the woman. She rose from her chair, relief washing over her in a wave. They left? She whispered. Yes, he said, returning to her side. For now, they have gone. But remember this, courage can change the outcome, even when fear seems stronger. And standing for what is right is never wasted effort. The woman's hand shook slightly, but she felt stronger than she had all day. You really risked yourself for me, she said, her voice soft but filled with awe. I don't know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me, he replied. Just carry this forward. Remember that courage and kindness matter, and that one act can inspire others to do what is right. That is all the thanks I need. She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she felt seen, respected, and safe. The blanket around her shoulders felt like more than fabric. It was a symbol of protection, of hope, and of the quiet courage that had saved her that day. The cowboy moved to the small window and looked out once more. The market was still visible in the distance, though the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. He could see the crowd thinning, townsfolk resuming their routines, but he knew that the memory of what had happened and the courage that had intervened would linger. Even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, moments of bravery could inspire change. He turned back to the woman. You will need to rest now, he said. Today has been exhausting, and tomorrow is another day. But remember what you have seen. Courage exists in everyone who chooses to act, and sometimes it only takes one person to make a difference. She nodded, a small but meaningful smile forming on her face. I will remember, she whispered. I promise. As night fell over the town, the woman settled onto the small cot, the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She could feel the exhaustion in her muscles, the weight of fear lifting slowly, replaced by a sense of resilience and quiet strength. The cowboy kept a watchful eye over her, standing near the window, ensuring that the alley remained safe. The events of the day played over in her mind, the humiliation, the fear, and finally, the bravery that had rescued her. She realized that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and unwavering, like the cowboy who had stood for her when everyone else had turned away. In that moment, she understood something important. Even in a harsh world filled with cruelty and injustice, there were still those who would act for what was right. And witnessing that courage gave her hope for the future, a hope that she had not felt in a long time. The cowboy finally turned away from the window, walking slowly toward the fire. The warm glow illuminated his face, calm and resolute. He knew the danger was not entirely over. Those men might return, but he also knew that standing for what was right had already made an impact. Even in a town that often chose indifference, one act of courage could ripple through the community in compassion. The woman closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the blanket and the fire soothe her. She felt safe, cared for, and strengthened by what she had witnessed. And though the memory of the market would never fully fade, she understood that she had survived not only because of luck, but because of bravery, kindness, and moral strength. Outside, the town grew quiet as the sun disappeared behind the hills. The market was emptying, shops closing for the night, and the streets were calm. Inside the small room, the cowboy remained a steady presence, a reminder that courage and morality could endure, even in a world that seemed unforgiving. For the Apache woman, the day had begun with fear and humiliation, but it ended with hope, safety, and a renewed belief in humanity. She understood now that courage could come from unexpected places, and that one person's choice to stand for what is right could change everything. And as she drifted into sleep, wrapped in the blanket that symbolized protection and hope, she felt the quiet strength of resilience settle within her, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Morning light filtered through the small window of the inn, casting soft beams across the wooden floor. The Apache woman stirred under the blanket, blinking slowly as she adjusted to the quiet warmth of the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, she slept without fear pressing on her chest. The events of the previous day, the market, the humiliation, and the bravery of the cowboy, played over in her mind, mingled with a sense of awe and gratitude. She rose from the cot, brushing the blanket over her shoulders. Her body still trembled slightly, not from fear but from the exhaustion of the emotion she had carried. Every step toward the small mirror on the wall felt tentative, as if she was learning to see herself again. Her reflection showed a woman marked by pain and endurance, but also one who carried a quiet strength she had not fully recognized before. The cowboy had been awake for some time, sitting by the small hearth with a mug of coffee, his eyes scanning the quiet street outside. When he noticed her looking at him, he offered a gentle nod. "Good morning," he said simply. His calm presence gave her a steadying comfort she could not explain. "Good morning," she replied softly, still unsure of what to say. Words felt inadequate to express the gratitude she carried in her chest. I don't know how to thank you. I was so lost yesterday." He shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "You don't need to thank me. You need only remember what courage looks like and carry it forward." He set the mug down, standing to offer her a reassuring hand. "Come with me. There are people who will help you. You don't have to face the world alone anymore." The woman hesitated, glancing around the room that had offered her temporary refuge. She had been safe here, but the fear of what might come next still lingered in the back of her mind. Yet the steady confidence of the cowboy reminded her that she could face the outside world again. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. They walked through the quiet streets, the town still waking from the night. The market, now empty of its previous chaos, looked peaceful and ordinary, but the memory of what had occurred there lingered in the woman's mind like a shadow. She kept her gaze forward, trusting the cowboy to guide her. He led her to a small public hall where a few townsfolk had gathered, quietly discussing the events of the previous day. Some faces showed curiosity, others a sense of reflection. There were whispers about the courage they had witnessed, how a single man had stood for what was right, and how his actions had shifted the balance of fear and respect in the market. "Here," the cowboy said, stopping at the doorway. "These people can help. You are safe now, and others will see to your needs." The woman stepped inside, the warmth and light of the hall offering a comforting contrast to the cold fear of the market. The townsfolk looked at her with a mixture of respect, apology, and admiration. Some nodded quietly, acknowledging the courage that had protected her. Others whispered words of regret for not acting sooner, but their eyes now carried sincerity. A kind woman approached, holding a bundle of clothing. "You can wear these," she said gently. "They're clean and safe. You deserve dignity after what happened." The Apache woman accepted them, her hands trembling slightly, and changed quickly in the small privacy offered. For the first time in hours, she felt a sense of control returning to her life. The cowboy remained nearby, observing but giving her space. "You have every right to stand tall now," he said softly. "What happened yesterday does not define you. Your strength and resilience do." The woman met his gaze, her dark eyes shining with emotion. I don't even know how to explain what your courage did for me," she whispered. "I thought no one cared. I thought I was alone." "You were never truly alone," he said. "There is always someone willing to stand for what is right." Sometimes it is enough to inspire others to do the same. Courage spreads quietly, like light, breaking through darkness. Her chest swelled with a mix of relief and pride. She realized that she had survived not because of luck, but because someone had chosen to act with moral strength and integrity. And that choice had given her more than safety. It had restored her sense of dignity, showing her that the world was not entirely cruel. Outside the hall, the town had begun to stir. News of the cowboy's actions had spread quickly, and people spoke in hushed tones about the events of the previous day. Some admired his bravery, while others reflected on their own inaction. The market, once a place of shame and fear, had become a symbol of moral awakening. The Apache woman stepped outside the hall, breathing deeply in the fresh morning air. The streets, though quiet, seemed less threatening now. She had a renewed sense of purpose and a belief that courage and kindness could create change, even in a town that had once seemed indifferent. The cowboy walked beside her, a steady presence, guiding her through the streets. "You have been through a lot," he said, "but remember this. The strength inside you is greater than any cruelty you encounter. Never let fear take that from you." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle within her. For the first time, she felt a connection to the world around her, a sense that she could engage with it without being broken by its cruelty. The memory of the market would remain, but it would now be tempered by the knowledge of bravery compassion, and moral integrity. They passed a small group of townsfolk who bowed their heads respectfully as they walked by. Some whispered words of admiration for the courage that had intervened on her behalf. Even those who had once ignored her plight now seemed to recognize the importance of standing for what is right. The woman felt her chest lift with pride. She had survived, not just physically, but emotionally. She had been seen, protected, and valued in a way that the world had denied her moments before. The blanket she had clutched the day before was no longer just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of hope, courage, and the possibility of moral action in the face of cruelty. The cowboy finally led her to a quiet area near the edge of town, where she could rest and plan the next steps of her journey. "You have a choice now," he said. "You can move forward with strength and dignity, carrying the lesson of courage with you, or you can let fear dictate your life. The choice is yours." The woman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day's events lift slightly. "I choose courage," she said firmly. "I will not let fear define me. I will carry what I have learned forward." The cowboy smiled, a rare warmth lighting his features. "Then you are stronger than you know," he said, "and your courage will inspire others, just as it has inspired me to act for what is right." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light across the town, the Apache woman felt a sense of peace settle within her. The market, once a place of humiliation, had become a place of awakening, not just for her, but for the entire town. One act of bravery had created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate moment, showing the power of moral courage to transform hearts and minds. The cowboy watched her for a moment, then tipped his hat and began to walk away. She called after him softly, "Will I see you again?" He paused, turning back with a faint smile. "Perhaps," he said, "but remember this, the courage you carry now is your own. Let it guide you. That is more important than any one person. You are never truly alone when you choose to act with integrity." The woman nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, not of fear or sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. She felt the strength of the day settle into her bones. She had faced humiliation, fear, and uncertainty, and survived. She had witnessed courage in its purest form, and had been protected by moral strength when she had least expected it. As the cowboy disappeared down the quiet street, the Apache woman turned her gaze to the town. The people she passed now carried a quiet respect, and the market, though ordinary again, had been transformed in her eyes. She realized that courage and kindness could leave a lasting impact, even in the harshest of places. She clutched the blanket once more, not out of fear but as a symbol of what had been saved. Her dignity, her hope, and her belief in humanity. The day had begun with despair, but it ended with strength, resilience, and the knowledge that one person's courage could make a difference in the life of another. And as she took her first confident steps into the streets of the town, ready to face whatever came next, she knew that the lesson of the market would remain with her forever. Courage was not just an action, it was a choice, and that choice had the power to change lives. For the Apache woman, the market had been a place of darkness, but it had also been the stage for light. The cowboy's bravery had shown her that even in a world that could be cruel and unforgiving, compassion, integrity, and courage could prevail. And now, she would carry that truth with her, moving forward with strength, hope, and a renewed belief in the goodness that existed in people ready to face the future with dignity intact.